Hello sports fans, welcome to Super Sports Central. Today, we're going to be going over Week 9 college ball rankings. So, going over last week's rankings and what those teams did in Week 8. Last week, at number 10, I had North Carolina. They lost to Virginia 31-27. 9 was Texas. They escaped Houston with the 31-24 win. 8 was Oregon. They beat Washington State by a score of 38-24. 7 was Oklahoma. They narrowly beat UCF, winning 31-29. 6 was Penn State. They lost to Ohio State 20-12. 5 was Ohio State. They beat Penn State 20-12. 4 was Florida State. They beat Duke by a score of 38-20. 3 was Washington. They barely beat Arizona State 15-7. 2 was Michigan. They demolished Michigan State, winning 49-0. And 1 was Georgia. They were on a bye. So this week's rankings, coming in at number 10, I've got Penn State. They fall to 10 following their 20-12 loss to Ohio State. Their defense was great, but their offense was awful. They could not run the football, averaging just 3.3 yards per carry, and that is not including the 4 sacks. And then their passing attack was brutal. Drew Allar completed just 42% of his passes for 181 yards and a touchdown. And Drew Allar has not been impressive at all this season. And they've been playing way too safe with Drew Allar in the passing offense. And now they actually need to have a good offensive game, and they're not able to do that. Because they play a good team, they take the training wheels off the offense, and Drew Allar has a bad game. The offense looks terrible. I had a lot of problems with the play calling this week for Penn State, and I'm dropping them all the way down to 10. I could see the argument to have them even lower, because they've now played one ranked team all season and played a terrible game against them. But Penn State comes in at number 10. I don't want to drop them too much because Ohio State's a really good team, but I've got Penn State at 10 because I also don't think there's anyone else deserving of the number 10 spot. 9, we've got Alabama. So they come in at 9 after they beat Tennessee by a score of 34-20. They used a huge second half where they outscored Tennessee by a score of 27-0. They were great defensively in the second half, and their offensive numbers aren't amazing, but Jalen Milroe was good, and running back Jason McClellan finished with 115 rushing yards and a touchdown. Alabama re-enters my top 10 for the first time in several weeks after what might be their best win of the season, and Alabama enters at number 9. Number 8, we have Texas. They move up one spot, which is a direct result of Penn State losing. Texas played a very close game against Houston. They ended up winning 31-24, but they blew a 21-0 lead. And the big thing for Texas this week is the injury to star quarterback Quinn Ewers, as he suffered a shoulder injury late in the third quarter and did not return to the game. So that is a huge blow for Texas, as Quinn Ewers has been great for them so far this season. But after Ewers left the game, running backs C.J. Baxter and Jonathan Brooks led the way. Brooks finished with 99 rushing yards, and Baxter ran for 42 yards and the game-winning score. But Texas, in a close win over Houston, they move up to number 8, which is really a direct result of the Penn State loss. But it's going to be interesting to see how Quinn Ewers' shoulder is moving forward as they host BYU next week. Coming in at number 7, we've got Oregon. They're another team that moves up one spot as a result of Penn State losing. Oregon goes up to 7 after a win over Washington State. They got off to a slow start, but ended up having a really good bounce-back game as they beat Washington State by a score of 38-24. Offensively, they were great, especially their run games. They ran for 248 yards and 3 touchdowns. Star running back Bucky Irving had a great game as he finished the game with 180 scrimmage yards and 3 total touchdowns. And Oregon, after the win and a Penn State loss, moves up to number 7. I think they're the best one-loss team in the country. Coming in at number 6, we've got Oklahoma. This is another team that played a very close game this week, but they move up because of the Penn State loss. Oklahoma narrowly beat UCF by a score of 31-29 after they stopped a UCF 2-point conversion. But Oklahoma quarterback Dylan Gabriel had a great game against his former team, throwing for 253 yards and 3 touchdowns, 2 of which went to Nick Anderson. But this should not have been as close for Oklahoma. They survive. Next week, they take a trip to Kansas, which could be a tricky game. They come in at number 6. Getting into the top 5, this is where it gets really interesting. I could see Ohio State, Washington, and Florida all being argued for 3, but obviously only one team can be 3. So coming in at number 5, I've got Ohio State. So you probably think that Ohio State should be a lot higher because they had a big win over another top 10 opponent. And it was pretty convincing, but I had a hard time moving them above Florida State when Florida State also had a good win. And I had Washington at 3, and I don't want to drop them too much even though they didn't play a good game. So I'm keeping the order of 3 through 5. 5 is Ohio State. They had a great win over Penn State. Their defense was great, holding Penn State to just 6 points before garbage time. They also allowed just 3.5 yards per play. Now, offensively, Ohio State wasn't great, but it was good enough to get the win against a great Penn State defense. Marvin Harrison Jr. had a great game, 11 catches, 162 yards, and a touchdown. And Ohio State, after a win over Penn State, they remain at number 5. I can definitely understand the argument to have them higher. Number 4 remains Florida State. They beat Duke by a score of 38-20, but I think Florida State got very lucky that Riley Leonard left the game with an injury, because when Leonard left, Duke was up 20-17, and Duke was also on the Florida State 11-yard line, going to score again. That possession ended up with no points as they failed a 4th down conversion, and then Duke didn't score the rest of the game. But if Riley Leonard doesn't leave, I can definitely argue Duke wins that game. But after Riley Leonard left the game, Duke took over, scoring touchdowns on their next 3 drives. Their offense was great, especially Jordan Travis. He had a big game with his arm and his legs. He threw for 268 yards and 2 touchdowns, and he was Florida State's leading rusher with 62 yards and a touchdown on the ground. Now, the defense is still a problem, specifically the run defense for Florida State, as they allowed 197 rushing yards to Duke, but Florida State beat Duke in a game that is a lot closer than the final score suggests. Florida State remains at number 4. Coming in at number 3, we've got Washington. So they narrowly beat Arizona State by a score of 15-7. It was an ugly win, and it was a big letdown game for Washington following their win over Oregon last week. But Washington, known for their offense, didn't score a single offensive touchdown this week. And Heisman contender Michael Penix Jr. really didn't get into a rhythm until late in the game. He finished the game with 275 yards and 2 interceptions. Now, some people are saying he isn't the Heisman favorite anymore. I would disagree. I think he is still the favorite, even after a bad game, because who else is there? I've heard a lot of people say J.J. McCarthy, and McCarthy's been great for Michigan, but Michigan hasn't played anybody. Their best win is against either Rutgers or Minnesota. So until McCarthy plays a team that's actually good, I don't think we can consider him a true Heisman favorite, unless there is absolutely nobody else. But I think Michael Penix Jr. is still the Heisman favorite. Now, Washington's defense was great. They came up with a massive 90-yard pick six to give them the lead for good. But Washington, after a terrible win over Arizona State, they remain at 3, but I could definitely see the argument to have them a lot lower than 3, maybe at 5. But I don't want to overreact to just one game for Washington, so they stay at number 3. But I could definitely understand having them lower. Number 2, we've got Michigan. So they were dominant in their win over Michigan State, winning 49-0. J.J. McCarthy, who we talked about a second ago, was great in the game with 287 yards and 4 touchdowns. And the defense was great for Michigan, pitching a shutout, as they also forced 2 interceptions and returned 1 for a score, plus they allowed just 3.1 yards per play. So another dominant win for Michigan, but they still haven't played anybody. They enter at number 2. And number 1 is Georgia. They were on a bye. They remain at 1. Next week, they take on their rival Florida in Jacksonville. And my updated playoff predictions, they remain the same as last week. 1 Washington, 2 Michigan, 3 Florida State, 4 Georgia. 1, 2, and 3 are all undefeated. I think Washington will have no problem bouncing back from an ugly win this week. That's just your classic letdown game, and they'll be fine the rest of the way. 2 and 3 are self-explanatory. They both stay undefeated in Michigan and Florida State. And then a 12-1 Georgia gets the nod over Oklahoma or Texas for the 4th slot. But those are my week 9 college football rankings. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, comment, turn notifications. I do my best to post as often as possible. Make sure to let me know in the comments if you agree with my predictions. Agree with my rankings, disagree, and why. I do my best to post as often as possible, and I will see you in the next video.